A presentation of the United States Fish and Wildlife Service.
Every fall, as they have for thousands of years, great flocks of snow geese arrive on Chincoteague Island. They've come after a summer on their nesting grounds in the Arctic and are now leading their young southward along the same route they have followed for millennia. Many other species of birds migrate along this ancient corridor that hugs the Atlantic coastline. Along the way, there are places where the birds have always stopped to rest and feed, to gather strength before continuing to warmer areas to spend the winter. The chain of sandy islands strung along the Atlantic, known as barrier islands, with their food-rich marshes and fertile tidal zones, have always been a destination and a haven for snow geese and other migratory birds, such as ducks, wading birds, as well as song and shorebirds. But as coastal areas become more developed and crowded, the number and quality of these life-sustaining sanctuaries has been steadily shrinking. Today, we celebrate Chincoteague National Wildlife Refuge, one of those special places along the Atlantic coast that will always be there for migrating birds and other wildlife. In 1903, President Theodore Roosevelt, appalled at the relentless slaughter of egrets, herons, and other magnificent birds, just for their feathers, set aside Pelican Island in Florida as a federal preserve for wildlife and protected it with only one very dedicated employee, equipped with his personal shotgun. Roosevelt's executive order signaled the end to a long era stretching back to the earliest colonial days that had seen many of America's wildlife species nearly wiped out by unregulated hunting and loss of habitat as wetlands were drained, forests felled, and the prairies plowed. The year 2003 marks the 100th anniversary of the establishment of that first refuge on Pelican Island. President Theodore Roosevelt would be delighted at what has happened with his idea. Today, there are more than 500 national wildlife refuges managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service spread all across the United States, preserving and protecting America's precious wildlife heritage. And what a heritage it is. The mission of the National Wildlife Refuge System, as mandated by Congress, is to administer a national network of lands and water for the conservation and management of fish, wildlife, and plant resources for the benefit of the American people. No refuge better illustrates this mission than Chincoteague National Wildlife Refuge. Not only does Chincoteague play a crucial role in providing habitat for migratory birds and other wildlife, but it is also one of the most visited and loved refuges in the system. Both migratory birds and visitors flock to the refuge by the millions each year. Chincoteague Island, where most of Chincoteague Refuge lies, has played an important role in the lives of local seafarers, fishermen, farmers, and townspeople for more than 300 years. Hunting the many birds that visited the island's marshes meant food for early settlers. The abundant fish along the beach and in the tidal estuaries provided food and a source of income. Another welcome source of income during the colonial period was the cargo that washed ashore from the ships that ran aground and broke up on the shifting sandbars off the beaches of Chincoteague. Most freight during those early days was transported between the colonies on small ships sailing on uncharted waters along the Atlantic coast. After a violent storm, it was not uncommon for local people to find barrels of rum, molasses, sugar, and preserved meats from a shipwreck washed up on Chincoteague Beach. Some historians believe that one of the ships that ran aground carried miniature horses that swam to shore when the ship broke up. These small horses bred with the regular-sized horses that local farmers were grazing on Chincoteague, resulting in today's larger but still small Chincoteague pony. Others believe that today's ponies are simply descendants from those that escaped the early settlers. Because of the large number of shipwrecks along this stretch of the Atlantic, Congress in 1831 authorized construction of a lighthouse on the southern end of Chincoteague. The lighthouse seen today replaced the original in 1867 and has been operational ever since. As the loss of lives and ships off Chincoteague Island continued, Congress again stepped in and established a life-saving station on Chincoteague Beach in 1875, one of several along the Atlantic coast. Over the next 40 years, incredibly brave surfmen who lived on Chincoteague Station made 174 daring rescues, mostly during the winter months. The life-saving stations were decommissioned in 1915, and the U.S. Coast Guard took over responsibility. For many years, the ducks and geese who visited the marshes around Chincoteague provided a rich bounty for local market hunters. Market hunters sold game to butcher shops and housewives. With the passage of the Migratory Bird Act in 1918, market hunting became illegal. But that didn't stop it. The hunters just became more secretive and more efficient. Homemade guns could slaughter dozens of birds with a single shot. By the 1930s, their killing efficiency began to seriously damage waterfowl populations. One species that was severely impacted was the greater snow goose that always stopped on the marshes of Chincoteague to feed and rest during spring and fall migrations. Primarily because of an alarming decrease in the greater snow goose population, Chincoteague National Wildlife Refuge was established in 1943 on the Virginia portion of Chincoteague Island. The land was purchased with money from the sale of federal duck stamps. Chincoteague was one of a number of refuges that were being established along migratory waterfowl flyways. Work began at the new refuge to improve and stabilize the habitat for migrating birds. Dikes were built to impound what little water rained on the refuge. Water levels in these shallow impoundments are carefully controlled by gates in accordance with the feeding needs of different species of birds at different seasons of the year. When the water is low, migrating shorebirds stop and gather strength by feeding on the small worms and insects living on the muddy flats. As these waters are drained during the spring, a variety of seed-bearing plants take root and grow. By fall, if the rains come, the impoundments are allowed to fill to a depth of half a foot or so, just deep enough so that dabbling ducks can tip and feed on the submerged seeds, vegetation, and aquatic invertebrates. While the refuge is guided by the science of wildlife management, it really is habitat that is managed. The areas seen along Wildlife Loop and the drive to the beach are just a small part of the Chincoteague Refuge. The refuge extends north to the Virginia-Maryland border and also includes islands in the bay and a number of barrier islands extending southward for 30 miles. The refuge continues to expand as it adds sensitive wildlife habitat purchased from willing sellers along the Atlantic. While the refuge was established to protect migratory birds, there are many other wildlife species on Chincoteague. Its pine forests are home to white-tailed deer and sika, an Asian elk released on Chincoteague in the early 1920s, long before it was a national wildlife refuge. Today, because of the growing recognition of the damage that non-native plants and animals can cause, the sika would not have been released. Sikas compete with the native white-tailed deer for the same food and space, and the habitat can show signs of overuse. Since there are no natural predators to control the sika's rapidly expanding population, the refuge allows a carefully controlled and limited hunt for sika in the fall and winter. When the white-tailed deer population blooms, it too is brought into balance by a limited hunt. Another species native to the forest is the endangered Delmarva Peninsula fox squirrel, a large bushy-tailed cousin of the common gray squirrel. The squirrel's population had been in decline due to a loss of its forest habitat. Between 1968 and 1971, 30 squirrels were released on the refuge with the goal of establishing a new population that would be protected from habitat loss and hunting. Nesting boxes placed around the refuge were readily accepted, and the population soon began to increase. Periodically, a sample of squirrels is captured and their health checked. The squirrels are steadily expanding the range of their habitat and are flourishing on Chincoteague Refuge. Another species nesting in refuge forests is the bald eagle. Once so rare, they were listed as endangered on the endangered species list. Today, bald eagles are no longer in danger of extinction as their population is steadily increasing. Also flourishing is the once threatened peregrine falcon. Biologists banned newborn chicks on the refuge's nesting tower. While the forests on Chincoteague are not threatened by logging, they are vulnerable to insect infestations. In the early 1990s, the forest along Wildlife Loop was lush and green. Then in 1993, the southern pine beetle struck, killing large sections of the forest. Volunteers have planted thousands of trees to restore valuable forest habitat. The trees planted are hardwoods, which are not susceptible to southern pine beetles. Like the Asian sika, Chincoteague ponies are not a natural part of the island's ecosystem. By grazing on dunes and other sensitive habitats, the ponies can do considerable damage. The ponies are actually owned by the Chincoteague Volunteer Fire Company and are allowed on the refuge under a special use permit with strict conditions as to where and how many ponies can graze, so that sensitive wildlife habitat can be protected. In the summer, the fire department raises money by auctioning off the foals. Another non-native species that stresses refuge habitat is the mute swan, easily identified by its orange beak and black nose hump. The mute destroys wetlands by uprooting aquatic vegetation, leaving behind a barren, muddy bottom. While other swans migrate to the Arctic to nest, the mute, a native of Europe, remains here, often taking over traditional nesting sites of native birds. It was long thought that bird migratory patterns were as fixed and predictable as the seasons, but biologists at Chincoteague Refuge and many other places are noticing changes. In the past, Canada geese have always migrated to the Arctic to nest. Now, some no longer make the trip and can be seen on the refuge year-round. These new residents are putting extra pressure on food resources. Over the years, the number of cattle egrets on the refuge has increased. Native to Africa, Some cattle egrets immigrated to South America in the late 1800s. They reached Texas and Florida during the 1940s, and in 1957 were found nesting near the refuge. The glossy ibis is another recent immigrant from the south. Before the 1940s, the glossy ibis nested only in Florida, but over the years they have extended their range northward, reaching the refuge by the mid-1950s. Keeping track of these shifting migration trends and monitoring the rise and fall of the different populations of birds migrating through Chincoteague is a daunting task. Most shorebird species visit the refuge only briefly during their long migrations from one end of the earth to the other. To get reliable estimates of these transient populations requires that the birds be identified and counted in a rigorously consistent manner. Refuge staff and volunteers begin their bird survey at precisely the same time every week.
You got these turns right out on the beach.
They make the same loop each time at the same pace, identifying and counting the birds. The goal is not to try and count every bird on the refuge, but by visually sampling the same way each time, a statistical baseline is established. From this baseline, using the same technique the U.S. Census uses, the population of a species can be projected. The data gathered can provide an early warning if a species population begins to decline.
You got a piping plover and two turnstones.
One shorebird whose numbers have been in a downward spiral is the piping plover, federally listed as threatened. Piping plovers nest on the refuge and are intensively managed to increase their population. Pipers begin to arrive to stake out their territories in late February when the beaches are deserted. By late April and into May, eggs are laid in a depression lined with broken shells on the open beach. Because the nests are vulnerable to gulls, crows, and grackles, as well as foxes and raccoons, protective exclosures are built while the eggs are incubated. In about 30 days, the chicks hatch and immediately begin feeding on their own, carefully shepherded by their parents. The hatch often occurs as the weather warms and beachgoers arrive. Because the flightless chicks may be disturbed, the refuge closes those areas of the beach where piping plover chicks are active. Even though refuge biologists keep a close watch, the mortality rate for plover chicks is high. Not only can predators and disturbance become a problem, but high winds and waves can wipe out a year's production in a single storm. The refuge is also concerned about other open beach nesters, such as black skimmers and oyster catchers, least and common terns. Sections of the beach where nests or chicks are found are also closed during the nesting season. While these closures may inconvenience some beachgoers, the refuge is required by law to put the welfare of wildlife first, particularly for those species in trouble. The barrier islands that are home to Chincoteague National Wildlife Refuge are like rivers of sand, always on the move. As waves pull sand from one area to deposit it down current, and storms and high waters carry sand inland. For most of its history, Assateague wasn't an island, but a long, narrow, sandy peninsula with farms and even a village where the refuge now sits. Storms would often breach the peninsula, creating an inlet to the bay, but after time, shifting sands would close the opening. In 1933, when a major storm opened an inlet just south of Ocean City, allowing boat passage to the bay and safe anchorage, Ocean City realized what an economic boom it would be to maintain the opening. A jetty was built to keep sand from closing the inlet. With the normal flow of sand along the coast cut off by the jetty, Chincoteague Island has been starved for new sand, resulting in severe erosion at the north end and increased erosion along its beaches. Sand moved along by the waves and currents is deposited at the southern end of Chincoteague in an area known as the Hook. When the Chincoteague Lighthouse was built in 1867, it was at the southern tip of Chincoteague Island. Since then, 5 miles of shoreline have been added. This buoy was once anchored in the water, marking the channel to Chincoteague. Not only has the island lengthened, but it's steadily moving westward. In just the past 2 decades, Chincoteague Beach is several hundred feet closer to the mainland. A marsh that waves are uncovering was once far inland, stark evidence of the island's westward movement. The only protection low-lying Chincoteague has are its dunes. These vital sandhills, formed by the wind and anchored with dune grasses, can hold back all but the most violent of Atlantic storms. The few major storms that do come often drastically rearrange the landscape. Their high winds and high water cut through the protective dunes, allowing ocean waters to wash over the island, wiping out nests, spreading sand over the grasses, and filling in the wetlands. While the policy in the past had been to rebuild the dunes along the public beach area, it was a futile effort, as new dunes soon washed away under the fury of the next violent storm. Rather than continue to fight a losing battle, the National Park Service and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service decided to allow the natural barrier island processes to run their course, which means that the beach landscape will change from storm to storm. Chincoteague Island is managed through a unique partnership between these 2 sister agencies of the Department of the Interior.
So they need food, they need water. What else do these birds out here need? We have food, we have water. A home. A home. That's right, they're going to need shelter, aren't they?
The refuge is a wonderful outdoor classroom that can breathe life into a biology lesson, and many school classes come to spend the day. While the refuge presents interpretive programs for visiting students, teachers are encouraged to learn about the refuge, so when they return, they can be the nature guides.
Courtney, can you write black duck in our book? I'll give you a hint for the birds.
The refuge also offers environmental education programs.
To show you how to set up this activity, these 6 are going to represent deer, okay? The rest of you are going to represent habitat. Some of these raptors...
By encouraging teachers to do the activities themselves, they learn how much fun and how rewarding it can be.
Ready, go! If you're bad, you're over here.
What color's their tail? What color's their tail? White. Young bald eagle does have a brown head and a brown tail, but you can still tell them by how big they are. You can question? Oh, look! It's an eagle! It's an eagle! To me, it looks like a juvenile bald eagle. What color are they?
If students are introduced to their natural world at a young age, perhaps a lifelong love and interest in wildlife and wild places will be kindled.
Oh, yeah.
After all, it will be up to today's youngsters, tomorrow's conservationists, to ensure that these precious places remain protected. For visitors, there is wildlife observation and photography, and programs to learn more about barrier islands and their plant and animal life.
It's gotta be better than you.
And for visitors, there is also the award-winning Herbert H. Bateman Educational and Administrative Center. The center has been nationally recognized for its energy-efficient design and its environmentally friendly use of recycled materials and renewable natural resources. State-of-the-art geothermal technology is used to control the temperature in the buildings. By circulating a special fluid through deep underground pipes, the Earth's constant temperature is captured and then used to heat the buildings in the winter and cool them in summer. Innovative water-saving devices such as low-flow toilets and sinks are saving more than 2 million gallons of water each year. Wastewater from the center is cleansed in nearby wetlands. The buildings have been designed to harness solar power. The many windows not only provide abundant natural light, reducing the use of electricity, but also offer close-up views of the surrounding forest habitat. The center has become a magnet for school groups from the region and for visitors from around the world. They are attracted by the more than 5,000 square feet of exhibits, which actively engage the visitor to learn about the value and the importance of wildlife management and habitat conservation.
Numbers are really
Environmental education programs are presented in the center's well-equipped auditorium.
than just protecting their habitat.
Close by is a classroom and other resources for teachers. A gift shop offers a wide assortment of educational and interpretive materials. For those who wish to get more involved, there is a very active volunteer program. Volunteers help out with popular activity-filled events the refuge sponsors during the year to celebrate Earth Day, International Migratory Bird Day, National Wildlife Refuge Week, and Waterfowl Week. Groups of volunteers from the Elder Hostel program come several times a year to Chincoteague for a week of hard work at their own expense, just for the pleasure of being outside and doing something to benefit the refuge.
But it is. You might catch some
Volunteers are also there when the refuge teams up with the National Park Service to introduce youngsters to the challenges of surf fishing.
Got it? There you go. Now you're set.
He's a kingfish. Lucky. It's a kingfish, and they're one of the better eaten fish out here.
While the primary purpose of the refuge is to conserve and protect wildlife habitat, it takes its mission to provide a quality wildlife experience for its owners, the American people, very seriously. So let us celebrate Chincoteague National Wildlife Refuge. It is, after all, your refuge.